We are live. Welcome to episode 13 of Shifty Perspective. We are in a different location today. We have, this is hopefully a lucky episode. We've got Darryl Bickler and Aleksi Hupli. So if you guys want to just start off straight away by introducing yourselves. Aleksi, if you'd like to go first.
All right, so hi, my name is indeed Aleksi Hupli. I'm a Finnish PhD student in sociology. Finishing my PhD at the moment at the University of Tampere, which is back home in Finland. Although at the moment I am doing this podcast at my friend's place in the middle of Holland, the green heart of Holland, at the Lake of Joy. My friend has this place. I could sort of describe it as a psychedelic bed and breakfast kind of. Taking a little break, holiday from my PhD and other sort of drug policy action that I've been doing. I'm part of a legalized organization here in the Netherlands, which is trying to create debate about drug policy. And I'm also a board member of the Finnish Association for Humane Drug Policy, and also a few other sort of academic institutions. So those are some of the hats that I have and try to bring into this discussion. I've been sort of studying drugs and drug policy for the last 10 years from a sociological and medical anthropological perspective.
Brilliant. That sounds very interesting, and sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. You're doing so many different projects and so many different groups that you're involved with. It's sounds very, very overwhelming almost.
That's why I'm taking a bit of a break as well, but I'm happy to be part of the Shifty Perspective, of course, on this sunny Sunday.
Brilliant. Glad to have you. And Darryl, what about you? Would you like to introduce yourself as well, please?
Well, I'm sort of rapidly calming down, having had the IT panic this morning. So I'm just nicely calming down, having not indulged myself in a lot of meetings recently. Everything needs resetting. So just getting into the feel of things, and I'll let everybody know my background is that I'm a qualified UK lawyer, and I got really interested in drug policy because I was lucky to meet Casey Hardison, who was imprisoned in the UK. And if you don't know Casey, he was a guy who manufactured LSD and other psychedelics in Britain, and unfortunately he got caught. But fortunate for me, I got to meet him, and he revolutionized the way I thought about the law. So I started to work with the law differently after I met him. And that has led me on my path, an obsessive path, I admit it, to try to set the world on fire with his idea that he launched with me, and we thought it through. But it was an incredible insight, this sort of meeting that we got, and how we start to understand the law. And I was overwhelmed by that experience. And this has lasted 15 years or more.
Well, so what was your experiences before you met him? How did you how did you look at psychedelics and drugs and legalization and criminalization before?
Well, I was always interested, and I'd recently been to Peru before I met Casey, and I'd tried ayahuasca for the first time.
Great.
I'd been representing people from my own paradigm before that in courts, and working on Crown Court cases with instructed barristers, as I was working as a solicitor at that time. Later on, I actually ended up having more contact in the courts because I was working pro bono and acting as a McKenzie friend for defendants who've had drug charges laid against them. And that was enabled me to get myself up to the High Court and speak to High Court judges about the law and how it had developed as a irrational response to the legislation, how the administration of law, this was what I was starting to understand. It was not, the law is not the law. The law is a set of principles enshrined within legislations to allow governments to work with an act of parliament and administer it in order to give effect to the true meaning of the law, the common law, and the principles of human rights. They all have to work into how a law operates. It isn't just the law, and this is obviously like public law, administrative law, and it's just not really working. It's not powerful enough in the drug policy field because the kind of work that people have been doing is not incisive. It's based upon misconstructions of the law in the way that we want to. We've been led to understand it. Really, it's that everything that we think we know, we don't know. And it's just a mind-boggling realization that the whole way of thinking about drug legality and legalizations, it's just an illusion. It doesn't exist in law. And
is this something that you are on your own in the UK, really, as a lawyer that in this site kind of things, or have you started to get support and there's other people that you?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry I started off with a bit of a rant, didn't really answer all your questions, but maybe it's better to let it go that way because
it's fine. We're just we'll go back and forth. There's no format.
Yeah. Could you repeat your question, please?
Are there other? Do you find yourself alone?
Yes.
In the UK?
It's been a very difficult experience, Ash. I can tell you that. I know that this is something that's very, very important, and it seems to be very easy for me to understand it now. It took me a long time to understand it, but now I understand it. Few other people seem to understand it, but it seems to be too simple to understand in a way. And yes, there are no lawyers. I mean, I have lawyers agree with me. I mean, you know, Rudy Fortson, Queen's Counsel, who's working with the Conservative policy group and sits on numerous committees of an authority on drug law, you know, in private correspondence with me says, yeah, you're absolutely right about what you say about the law. And it's, I wouldn't be doing it for 15 years. I mean, if I didn't know that what I was saying was right, and people know it's right on a number of levels. I know this idea of sort of claiming to have the truth is problematic. It is very problematic because it makes one look like a nutter. But what we've got here is a crossover of constructs that apply linguistically, legally, philosophically. They all fit the paradigm that Casey unpicked and that I've worked with ever since. They all fit that. So it has to be right, but for some reason, people don't want to know. And I think maybe they find it challenging, or they find it against some other interest, that they think that I'm saying something that is going to damage their interest.
Aleksi, what do you think from a sociological perspective? Is this something that you kind of experience? That people are just switched off to this, and you really are just like fighting to show someone something that's actually so simple, really? Or
well, I mean, I started sort of my interest into drug policy from a sociological perspective, looking at the political discourse in Finland about 10 years ago. There was a bit of a debate whether women that are pregnant and that are diagnosed as having substance abuse problems should be treated against their will, so enforced treatment to protect the fetal health of the unborn child. And a lot of politicians use this very moralistic, but also sort of scientific discourse of like, we should do this because we have this massive problem and there's so many children being born with fetal alcohol syndrome and those types of things. So they really use this sort of scientific language, although it is sort of this sort of legal questions about whose rights are there that we need to protect. Is it the unborn child, or is it the actual individual rights of the adult woman? And this is sort of a approach to this issue that in Nordic countries, for instance, Norway and Sweden, they technically have a law that does allow some form of treatment against the will of the pregnant women if they are indeed diagnosed. But in Finland, it did sort of cause a bit of a debate about indeed whose rights we need to uphold in this situation.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's a complicated issue. I mean, like, you can have a best intentions of a policy, but in real life, it might actually mean that the women do not come to prenatal services that are free in Finland because they will be afraid of being committed of a crime or treated against their will. So it might not actually have the effect that the policymakers were planning on having, but it never actually came to be a law in Finland at that point. And I did my bachelor's and master's thesis on this topic, and then moved to the Netherlands to look at what's the situation here in the Netherlands, which is sort of known to be quite liberal in drug policies. How do they deal with this issue of pregnant women with substance abuse disorders? But I never actually got to really looking into that, because one of the first lectures that we had, there was something that caught my attention, which was cognitive enhancement or chemical enhancement. So sort of the positive side of drugs, which is often also not really discussed in drug policy discussions. Like, people don't use drugs for the harms of them, they use it for whatever benefit that they seem to be getting from it. But that's sort of very often left out because the focus is on the harms of the drug. So I've been trying to sort of balance between these two, like there's harms and there's benefits, and somewhere in the middle there's policymakers. And
I'd like
do you
to
find
add
that
something
both?
there.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
It's interesting, the construct that we're using of rights, and I'm not going to sort of disagree with anything that Aleksi is saying, except that I'm, in my interest in language and law, I'm quite keen to differentiate between the rights of the unborn child and the rights of the mother in terms of the way that we describe it. Now, I know there's qualitative differences. We could have a discussion. So I'm not saying that my rights analysis trumps whatever qualitative values that you might attribute to the unborn child. But in terms of rights, I think we have to respect them and try to rescue them, actually, because the meaning of the word has become a little bit degraded, in my view, certainly in terms of what civil rights classically meant. And civil rights are to do with freedoms that you can have from the state, which is exercised as an adult, an autonomous citizen.
Yes.
And the sentiment that we feel for the unborn child, whether it be totally valid and a deeply held religious belief, or something that is truly meaningful, nevertheless, the child can't exercise, or the fetal, I shouldn't say child, sorry, that's completely wrong for this example, the fetus cannot exercise rights. So we have a lobby group or an interested adult who would try to exercise rights on behalf of the unborn fetus. Now, you might say that what's the difference, but in terms of agency and power, you can see it doesn't lie with the fetus. It may lie in the fetal interest, but it isn't the right of the fetus. It's just an interest society would like to respect. So it's a protection. So when I'm using the word rights in drug policy, I don't sort of talk about the rights in any other way, except that they are adult freedoms from intervention, real liberties like freedom of expression or freedom of choice to use substances.
No.
Just wanted to add
Would
that.
you say as well the freedom to not be incarcerated for selling of substances as well? Is that, or are you just talking about the freedom of users, in people to use in general?
Well, it's really a sort of an aspiration towards a cognitive liberty, which is not to be sort of a lab rat in somebody's huge experiment about what molecule can create your way of thinking or trigger some modality of being, because that's the way I see it, as a censorship. That's what they're doing with words. And we have an adult right to cognitive liberty, I thought you were going to say, right, not to be forced to do that. Yeah, of course, it works both ways. You have to have a right to expand into the space and become it, because it is us, it is you. It's a biochemical continuum, and we're being sort of restrained into a little cocoon, really, by words, by laws that say, well, your permeability to this other is being restricted. And that is what I'm saying. Rights can't even exist truly at this moment, because what we are, literally, socially and biochemically, is being defined by drug law, which says, well, this whole material of reality that makes thought and makes the way we can see ourselves and our environments, it isn't what is, it's what we say it is. We're going to cut out huge chunks of reality. And so it's a right to exist biochemically and of course socially, because those laws socially define us when the police can come and do something. And I'm really keen to protect those rights and not talk about like the rights of trees or the rights of any other entity than adult human beings, because whatever the merits of those sentiments are to protect nature or something which is divisive. I mean, we can't just talk about sort of gender-specific rights. They're all rights, true rights are universal. Otherwise, we're talking about something else, something like a protection or an entitlement. That's I think is a good rule of thumb, just to differentiate what we're talking about. Are we actually talking about something which gives us power and freedom, or are we talking about something which gives us reliance on the state and only applies to some people because they need it, because they're victims, or because they're a certain color allegedly, or a certain gender allegedly, that they need something specific? So I'm getting right into the core that the conversation has to focus on genuine universal rights if we're ever going to get out of this mess.
Yeah, of course, Aleksi.
And just to add, I think this is, at least in my mind, I sort of put this quote to the mouth of Professor David Nutt, like, as Darryl mentioned, cognitive liberty, and it is sort of a cognitive liberty issue. And if we don't have cognitive liberty for our own brain and cognition and alter it, whether means we find sort of beneficial for ourselves, then what kind of other liberties can we expect to have if we don't even have that as a starting point?
Would the defense of that be that the harms outweigh those potential benefits of the cognitive liberty, and by giving people that access, then you're going to create more societal harm? I mean, I know, like, I've heard of in a lot of drug cases, people getting charged with what I can't remember the name, the exact term, but it's essentially damaging society.
Yeah, I mean, there's arguments that, I mean, then if we follow that, then alcohol and tobacco and those kinds of legal substances should not be legal, if that's the sort of the premise that we put drug policy on. And then also, how does it help the user in any way if there's harms of the substance itself, but then the additional harm of you might get indeed prosecuted and maybe even sent to prison, and like
lose your house, lose your job.
I have to say something following from the conversation with David Nutt, because he does write about the problem extensively, and it's the problem of the hot air in drug policy, and he talks about legal and illegal drugs without the hot air. And I have to be blunt. I have to be blunt, and I'll say this is that I get a lot of stick, so it's not very professional to criticize somebody or to to say it's wrong. But this is a very important game, and it's to do with our existence. And sometimes we have to, like a professional, you have to tackle it. We have to tackle people who are making a very dangerous world for us, because they are the official spokespeople. And if they lead us down the garden path, that isn't nice. And rather than just saying, well, in my humble opinion, we have to say, well, you have to tackle that. It's like it's a sport, a professional sport. It's not anything more than trying to survive and to knock that back, because people are very, very wary nowadays of criticizing or getting not being in an echo chamber, because we're all on it together. And I'm sorry, but what Aleksi is saying, and I don't want him to feel any kind of upset, because this is what I'm fighting against, the whole phenomena of people being led to believe that anything that was happening in that conversation could actually happen in that way, because there is no legality. There is no legality in drugs, no illegality in drugs. We can't legalize drugs. We can't talk about illegal drugs. Talking about illegal drugs is the single most terribly offensive, dehumanizing, enslaving concept. You know, people are so worried nowadays about offending people with isms, but they just freely talk about legalizing drugs and decriminalizing drugs as if it doesn't matter. Those drugs only exist as part of reality. We are those drugs. We are permeable to those drugs. Those drugs don't have legal status for any reason. They can't in law. They just cannot have legal status. The only thing that can have legal status is us. We can act legally or we can act illegally. And there's a huge difference between saying these drugs are illegal, and we're acting illegally in this case, because our actions can be controlled by and judged through their agency and their merits. That's what the Misuse of Drugs Act sets out to do. It judges human action. As soon as you believe that you can legalize drugs, or you can talk about illegal and legal drugs without hot air, you're completely lost. It means nothing. It means nothing. And it's really, really dangerous thinking, I have to say. And I know it just slips off the tongue because we're so used to talking about it all the time. So I don't want to be like, with you, but this is important. I have to tackle you for saying that, Aleksi. I have to tackle you, even though you know you're doing so much more than me. You're doing everything. You know, I have every respect for you, but I have to tackle you now. They don't think about what I'm saying. You can't say like, you know, we're going to legalize drugs, because what we're doing is we're abstracting our agency out of the conversation. We're completely missing all the nuances of regulating people's actions. And we're buying into this binary system that it serves the elite completely, that you've got your legal and illegal drugs. So, you know, for some reason, alcohol isn't controlled. It's not even alcohol not being controlled. It's how you are controlled. It's how you are controlled. They say, you know, you get, you know, allowing alcohol into you. But it isn't alcohol. It's not about excluding alcohol. It's about excluding people concerned with alcohol, or the concept of alcohol, out of the Misuse of Drugs Act. And it isn't. It should be there. When he talks about legal drugs, it's almost as if he believes, and he used to show this in a Venn diagram. He used to have a Venn diagram with like the Misuse of Drugs Act here, and then alcohol and tobacco somewhere else on the other side. And it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Okay, can I just do a camera test a second? Because I wanted to try this. Right, does this make sense? You can see that. Can you read that? So when I've just got, if I do this, can you still read it?
Yeah.
No, but if you look at me now and me now, you accept it's both me. Nobody's going to argue with that. It wasn't me making a mess of the intro at this program, just babbling on for 10 minutes. I'm sorry, but it wasn't me. It was him. It was this guy over here, right? And you wouldn't argue about it. And it's the same thing with this illegal drugs thing. You think it's the same thing. You think it's the same thing because something that we call a transferred epithet. The transferred epithet is a figure of speech which shortens it. So otherwise English would be, or any language would become completely impossible to understand. It would take ages to say. It wouldn't be possible to understand, rather. It would take ages. So instead of saying walking stick, you'd have to say, this is a stick designed for helping a person walk, because the stick cannot walk. So we give the agency to the stick, and we do it all the time. And it doesn't matter, except when you're describing yourself in biochemical and legal reality, because then you switch it. You switch the subject and the object. You didn't notice for the same reason you didn't care which way around this camera was. You didn't care because it means the same thing to you, because you're conditioned to believe that a drug which is illegal to possess without license, authority, or exemption is the same as an illegal drug. That's the thing. You switched it so the drug takes the legality out of your action. A drug which is illegal to possess or sell, as you asked me before. Sorry, I forgot all about the question. Or sell, as you said before, without license, authority. Or, so you can have a seller's license. So a drug is not an illegal drug. It's a controlled drug. It's a drug which you are subject to controls. It's not really the drug which is controlled. That's another transferred epithet where we switch to make it shorter. So we don't have to say it's a drug which activities regarding it are controlled and regulated.
So would you say
it's a controlled drug? But the control is, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Would you say we should be saying a controlled drug over illegal drugs, and that's
well, definitely not illegal drugs. Controlled drugs is slightly problematic because it opens a conversation. First of all, you could say, well, it's an oxymoron because we've clearly lost control of controlled drugs. But if you really want to explain it, controlled drug, it's not the verb to control like the judges misinterpreted. This was something that actually got me in with Casey because I had previously been mentioning, when I think you tried to tease this out of me at the beginning, but I was still in the tech situation, that I had contributed to a case where they looked at this idea of preparation of controlled drugs. And my name came in the judgment. It was to do with San Pedro cacti and ayahuasca. And basically the law had been extended to include these non-scheduled plants. They ended up becoming drugs because they said that we prepared them. The verb preparation means that you prepare them, and therefore, like your hand of man test
for consumption,
it becomes a drug when it's only a plant. And I said, well, this can't be right because a preparation doesn't mean to prepare. It means it's a noun. It's not a verb. It's a noun, adjective plus noun, a preparation of controlled drugs. So it was a completely a reversal done in language again. And these concepts have to be looked at very closely about what they were. But Casey noticed that, and that's when he contacted me. Actually, I've just put that in at the beginning now.
How do you find that arguing essentially it down to the names? How does that get met in court?
Well, there is a significance to it, you see, because what the issue is not, the issue is how do we administer a neutral act of parliament, which is ostensibly there, its purposes are there, which are to protect society or to ameliorate the negative consequences of drug misuse. And it does say drug misuse. It doesn't say some drug misuse, and it doesn't say drug use. So it's the misuse of drugs, all drugs. And yet they managed to come up with this legal, illegal stuff that will never drop, that somehow people concerned with alcohol are exempt.
Is this the same everywhere? I mean, like, is this in Finland or in the Netherlands, like where you are now, Aleksi, or is this just is the law that Darryl was talking about based just about is it Crown law, and is that unique to the UK? Does the UK have a special way of wording things which doesn't make sense?
I just want to sort of point that I've had the privilege of hearing this sort of argument from Darryl earlier, and I do really appreciate and sort of respect that indeed there's no such thing as illegal or legal drugs. It's not something that the substance in itself has as a quality. It is legalized or illegalized. It's an action that we've done around that substance, and it doesn't really tell anything about the sort of properties of the chemical. And I think in Finnish language in particular, I mean, drugs in English can mean medicines, or it can mean other substances. Like, it's a bit vague term in itself. In Finland, there's even more sort of very categorical division between a medicine, which is lääke, and a drug or a narcotic, which is huume. And like, some stuff are put under this category of bad narcotic, and some of them are put on this good medicine, although we know that both can be used for good or
interchangeable.
Bad. Yeah, exactly. Like, they can be enhancing or they can be detrimental depending how you use them and in what situation.
Okay. Do you find that it does come down to it often that in the details of the law, in court cases, it is the arguments of the words as such, or like the semantics of it, or can you kind of brush that aside and even counter it on I guess like a ethical, on a sociological level, and go even further and say, okay, well, forget about how you label these, whether it is illegal or not. We need to tackle the fact that these things have benefits, that we're wrong in our thought process on all of this.
I think that the courts have have not listened to what I've said because they have, again, they played games with us at the High Court, and unfortunately, we didn't get the arguments fully listened to because the parties to the actions were tampered with. But in terms, it's a reversal again. They did. Yes, all the weight of arguments about cognitive liberty and all the different human rights, they should all come through. What I'm saying is that we're actually making ourselves invisible. Those arguments are never heard about privacy and property and Article 9 for freedom of thought and the proportionality of interference, because it has always been sort of looked at that it is illegal, rather than this idea that we are supposed to be making controls that regulate people to achieve a reasonable purpose, which is not to stop all drug use, but to just address and deal with drug misuse that causes social problems. So yes, it's fine to argue for all of those benefits that we might get out of positive uses of drugs, but we have to do it through the right paradigm, because as soon as we believe that we're actually arguing a specific case for a specific use of a specific product, we're really missing what this is about, because this has to be about the general principle of whether we have any autonomy in respect of what we take into our bodies as just beings. And we either sort of grasp that very basic nettle, or we sort of flap about saying, well, these people could get some benefit out of some molecules sometimes. Isn't that a good idea? Isn't that the thin end of the wedge that will get us to where we want to go? But it won't, because it's not basing the argument on strength, but on divisions, entitlements, acute needs, and saying, well, you know, we're victims who need help in this case to recognize our needs. Will you please give it to us? And it doesn't actually, they just get kicked back in the teeth nearly every time. And even if there's a tiny, tiny, tiny victory for some child to have medical cannabis at some point, it doesn't actually open any doorway apart from just this idea that, oh, you know, some very vulnerable people out there that perhaps, you know, we could just not kick their teeth in every 5 minutes for taking cannabis. But it doesn't open the door to this idea of how are we regulating ourselves through law? How does the law regulate us? And at the moment, it's doing it like we are slaves, because we are beholden to this idea of that the state can control objects, that they can control reality. And it isn't what the social contract's about in law. The social contract is about controlling legal subjects are beholden to a law which is subject to all the common law principles, human rights principles, and all the other recognitions that we could have, except we're just invisible to it, because they've managed to reverse everything in language and make us think that they can make drugs illegal. And we believe it. And it's, yeah, do the courts take any notice? They will, when we understand it. When people understand it, they will take notice, because the government is duty bound to administer a neutral law. So like we were saying before, you know, this is the normal thing. Why are alcohol and tobacco excluded? Well, they're legal drugs. You know, this is what they say. They're legal drugs. And we've got cultural preferences for them and other things which are not valid in terms of administration of law. So there is a legal argument. It just needs to be understood. The legal argument is that we have a neutral act of parliament that regulates people, and we're administering it in a way which is entirely an illusion. And we believe it because we believe these shortcuts in language bear equivalence to what legal reality is, that illegal drugs are the same thing as drugs which are illegal to possess without license, authority, or exemption. And it's that license, authority, exemption that's not happening. And that was opened up, not just for Alfie Dingle or someone needs a medical cannabis, but the whole principle is that we are people who should be regulated in a way which minimalizes social harm. And we can only do that through controls, not by believing in an illegal drug. Sorry, I'm just hammering it now.
I agree with what you're saying, but like I honestly think that most people don't care enough about it or think enough about it, maybe not caring, or they don't consider the depth of it until they're in a position where, for example, they are caught with drugs and then they have to go to court with it. And then in that case, at that point, I can't see them necessarily using your defense, because they're at the point where there's just the societal pressure and the court system set up.
I
for
wouldn't
them
suggest
to
any. I
guilty.
don't want to suggest anybody does that as a defense right now. What I'm saying is that it's a principle that needs to come into drug policy. That instead of talking about legalizing illegal drugs, we need to blow it up, because this language, this understanding, actually opens up the very thing that they claim they want, which is the blueprint for regulation. Transforms blueprint for regulation is what they want, and you can only regulate people regarding controlled drugs. You can't regulate illegal drugs because it's completely dehumanizing binary. There's no space for regulation in that language, and the language shapes reality, not just in everyday conversation, but in law. It is the reality. As soon as you create an illegal drug in law, you're finished. It doesn't exist in law. As soon as you create it, then you are finished. That is the bottom line. Don't create it. Don't bring it into being, because it is a very different construct to what we should be talking about, which are the rights of the individual. There can be no other conversation. If we talk about the status of drugs, we're finished. We'll never just regulating, managing lists of molecules. No, we have to talk about when should the law intervene in people's lives, and why should it control our biological social makeup in the way that the Misuse of Drugs Act is doing, the way that it's being administered. So the Misuse of Drugs Act is perfect. It's just the way it's being misunderstood. It's being operated backwards.
Yeah, I agree. I've got Aleksi here, I think, wants to add something to this as well.
Yeah, I have a chapter in my PhD, which is hopefully coming out end of this year. It's sort of a theoretical framework where I try to go beyond the sort of dichotomy or division between legal medicines and illegal or illegalized drugs, and just sort of frame both of them as technologies or pharmacological neurotechnologies. I sort of get inspiration from science and technology studies, and something that anthropology of pharmaceuticals have been looking at that these are indeed sort of molecules, things that have their own sort of social lives, and they have sort of agency. And I mean, they are technologies that humanity has used for millennia. I mean, they've been probably part of our co-evolution one way or another. And it is sort of, it can sort of link drugs into that wider technological sort of discussion that we have at the moment, from deep brain stimulation, like literally opening somebody's skull and putting a little device in there.
Electrode,
cognitive liberty would also take that kind of thing on board, I think, wouldn't it, Aleksi?
Yeah.
If you could get a right to cognitive liberty, you'd have a right not to be given treatment.
Yeah, that indeed as well. Like, it's not just that I have a right to use something, but also I have a right to refuse to taking certain substances. I mean, it's I don't think it's gonna hold in court, like going there and saying like I'm just using this technology, but it is sort of a way of thinking about all of these in the same kind of framework, which hopefully would kind of get us beyond that sort of division. But I'd be very happy to get some comments from Darryl and
I think society has to lead there, Aleksi. I've tried to do this in court, and I was complaining that they messed up the case for me, and they threatened me that if I ever did it again in High Court, they would make me pay for all these hearings, all the charges for all the things, and they would take my own home off me and everything.
Who said this?
This is the High Court.
The
in
High
the
Court
judgment.
said this.
Yeah, they said they didn't want to hear it again, and that's because I exposed the fact that they had played with the papers in the first case. So the first hearing, they misrepresented the case in the special civil servant administrative court missive to the judges. So you have to understand that public law courts are actually operated by civil servants, and yet public law courts are where you take the government to court for misadministering law. So here we are trying to say, look, the Home Office is not doing its job, and we also judicially reviewed the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs. We reviewed them both to say why you're not bringing alcohol and tobacco users into the law, the neutral law that's supposed to protect us. Why you're over-regulating controlled drug users and not making any controls, and under-regulating those people. And we took those cases and they didn't like it. And the civil servants, we've got government people who work in the court who prepare the information for the judges. And they prepared completely false information about our cases. So we lost it in front of Lord Justice Leveson. That was me on my feet having to do that for the first time in the High Court. And since then, they said, if I do it again, because I exposed it, because they actually, by mistake, they sent me their private documents. Yeah.
So you then just had to just leave it, or
well,
if
if I stand up in court and say this and they don't get it, I'm going to lose a lot of money. That's why I think the way forward is not what the courts say, but to get the public to understand it. Because at the moment, I just sound like a lunatic, and I probably still do this morning, because it's too early for me to do it.
Well, I think it's very important what you're doing, but I really, really think that what people like Aleksi are doing, where bringing it to like the public discourse, or kind of positive action, which creates like all of the different groups that you're involved with, just brings so much attention. I think through social media and things like that now is amazing. You can actually have people that would never, they probably wouldn't be interested in a discussion like this or hearing what you would say, because it's very
I'd
technical.
like to know what Aleksi would think from sociological perspective, actually, about this closing of debate, because I am being cancelled doing this, believe me. And I said, I would like to know
you get attention
why is
still
cancel culture
right?
making one particular story that every single policy group, the new drug policy science group, Transform, and all of the new books and all the initiatives are all saying the same paradigm about legal and illegal drugs, even though they don't exist. Why are people closing down debate rather than opening it up? I just don't get it. Do you any thoughts, Aleksi, please?
Hard to say. I mean, it is maybe just so in our culture, sort of have that division between illegal, legal, good, bad. I mean, it's sort of.
Yeah, I'm talking about the drug policy movement. Why is the drug policy movement becoming a homogenous, one size fits all? This is our model for regulation. Everybody's got to get on the medical use of this, the MAP stuff, the psychiatric testing of veterans. Is one truth now that's come out, and anybody that steps outside that bubble is cancelled. And I'm outside it, not because I don't believe in the work they're doing, it's because I don't like the way they describe it, because it makes it a lot more difficult to get real liberty.
But you're not cancelled by them, but like it's more of the, like you said, the judges and the actual the system that is already in place isn't giving you a voice. I mean,
no, but we've got to start at the right debate into society, and then it would have traction in court. I can't stand up in court and say something that's never been said before.
I think starting it in multiple angles, though, because yes, your side is correct, but also what, having more things like maps and stuff like that, and promoting kind of people getting education around the positive things associated with drugs it can be done at the same time. It doesn't just have to be, okay, we're just going to focus on one aspect of this. I think that having this umbrella.
Only if we're cognizant of the framework we present that in, because if we present it in a very victim-led framework where the government can create illegal drugs and we want to tax and license drugs, and we speak all the time in that paradigm where all the human qualities because we can't do any of those things to drugs, really. We're taxing ourselves, we're controlling ourselves, we're restricting ourselves, we're licensing ourselves. Now, I would like in any organization to stop dehumanizing us while they're going for their little slice of the control, and they want to milk the system to get some kind of ability to offer some therapy or some product ahead of everybody else being able to use it freely. And that's supposed to be the slippery slope towards liberation. I don't think so. I think they have to explain what they're doing in the correct paradigm, because as soon as they start dehumanizing us and inventing these quasi-legal constructs that don't exist in order to keep their regulation space, it's not good enough. They have to be able to work towards this idea that at core it is fundamentally a principle of existence that we are entitled to be to have access, even if it's regulated. We're all entitled. We're all entitled to be human. It doesn't mean because you've got PTSD or any other descriptor that you become more entitled to be human and exist in nature, and even with synthetics, all part of the continuum of reality, is that we all have that, and we must maintain that. We're not going to get through in little bits by saying that some people are more special in some way or more deserving than others. We can only present our research about a particular group and saying, well, look how it benefits them. Not that these people should just have access. It's that, look, there is a benefit to these drugs. They are good. Therefore, these goods are universal. If it helps somebody who's been to Vietnam, it helps somebody that's not been to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
and
don't,
I mean,
sorry.
I think, the whole global anti-drug war movement, it's not unified, it's not homogenous in a sense that you can have indeed medical cannabis advocates who are, they don't like other drug users, or they don't like to be associated with like psychedelics or other, and then psychedelic people might be like, cannabis, such a mild thing and doesn't really give that much to us anymore. So like even in that movement, there are these sort of separate sort of cliques, but it's a it's a battle that's been fought in many fronts. I guess you have local context, and then the global international community that sort of comes together in Vienna. And indeed, that sort of experience of going to the Commission on Narcotic Drugs and seeing how the scheduling is done, like there's a new substance and they just declare that, okay, we're gonna control this because it has no therapeutic value. That's not something that they've actually even investigated at that point. And they say that it has a high potential of abuse because it resembles some of these older substances that were put in here 50 years ago. Therefore, they must be similar. And they just sort of very unifiedly, everybody votes yes when WHO or World Health Organization sort of votes.
Were you there observing this?
I've been going there since 2017, basically every year, and just sort of
and you can sit in.
Topics. Yeah.
You can sit in whilst this is happening, whilst the voting's happening, and
yeah, I'm part of the civil society in that sense. It's kind of funny how also people are divided in there. You have the official government delegates who have a red pass, and then you have the civil society that have a yellow pass, and then few media people, but not much. It's been also quite extraordinary that these high-level meetings happen every year, twice a year, but there's not really any media there to cover it and tell it to the public, like, hey, this is going on. For instance, the cannabis vote that's supposed to happen already 2018, I think, end of that year, but has been now postponed until should happen December this year, but we'll see.
And what will they be voting on the cannabis one?
WHO
unschedule it from one.
Well, yeah, there's rescheduling, and the whole sort of international scheduling is also kind of very complex system. And WHO did a critical review on cannabis, something they haven't done since I think the 30s or the 50s, so it's been a while.
Wow.
And lo and behold, they discovered that, hey, cannabis has medical utility, so it should not be in the highest restriction. But then, of course, cannabis is not a one thing. We have all those compounds in there, and extracts and
synthetic cannabinoids and CBG and
cannabinoids and all that. So like it is a complicated matter, of course, but it's not. I mean, drug policy has never been, I guess, about drugs themselves. Indeed, it's about controlling certain people.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, I'm not so unrealistic that I think that we can all just take any medicine at any time without. There has to be regulation of the whole access of it. I agree, but the principle always has to be undermining that there is this wonderful idea of liberty to explore, that we facilitate it in a way which gives people complete choice. Rather than say, well, yes, cannabis medication, I'm not disagreeing with any of that. It all has to be done from a positive angle, that where does the regulation for medicine necessarily start? And here we're dealing with the power of doctors really wanting to maintain these prescribing rights and their control over drugs, because we're really talking about everything, medicines, not really drugs.
Pharmaceuticals as well.
Yeah, we've got such problems with the word drugs because it's misused to mean illegal drugs, which means controlled drugs, which means drugs which are controlled without license, or sorry, people who are being controlled. So there's all these sort of levels of language. And really, if we're going to sort of move towards medicines, I mean, I don't really want to sort of have a right to prescribe myself absolutely everything, because I think there should be some oversight. There should be some oversight in that, but always cognizant of that principle that an autonomous adult can be, you know, suitably educated in a society whereby their choices are reasonably rational, but we have some kind of regulatory provision to stop the abuse. It's why they started with regulating people regarding opium, really, because they just knew, you know, that was the first drug laws were really about opium. Well, poor people or other people using opium, I should say. The laws are always about people, not opium. And in fact, curiously enough, it's the only drug which is illegal to use in Britain, is opium. It's the only drug. People say, when I tell them drugs are not illegal, they always say, oh, well, you mean using drugs is illegal? I said, no, it's not. It's the only drug which is illegal to use is actually opium. And that's because what we were saying before about the misuse. It's all about misuse. So if we're not going to, you know, we're only target misuse. That is the key. Whereas we all accept that we've got a propensity towards addictive aspects of personality to abuse stuff. Again, it's another word. I don't know what Aleksi thinks about the constructs of addiction, but I'm always trying to rescue agency. There's a theme to what I'm saying, is that I'm always trying to suggest that the human has power over the object, whereas addiction sort of almost reverses that again. It's almost like the object has power over you, which of course it does in their law. Their law, they've made it illegal, which means that they took your power away and gave it to their substance. If you follow my train of thinking there, it really, you know, so it starts in language. And how does somebody approach a drug? Well, if you approach it as an addict, you're already an addict to an illegal drug. You actually have destroyed with words. Whatever you think you're saying, those words represent something extremely dehumanizing, that you have given your agency, literally and metaphorically, to the object, because you believe that you were addicted, which is subservient to the object, and that the object took your legality. Addicted to an illegal drug has to be the most dehumanizing construct possible, and self-perpetuating. I hope that makes sense, because I think that sums up a lot of what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And indeed, that's sort of, sorry.
Oh, no, go on, please.
Yeah, and indeed, that sort of chemical hook theory that, you know, you take one cannabis puff and you're addicted to heroin for the rest of your life. I mean, that's sort of the public perception of a lot of substances, unfortunately.
Well, that is how some people are taught.
I would say that's a perception about how people are thought of, Aleksi. You see, they say, well, you know, you touch one thing and then you'll want to touch another. Yeah, they're saying that you're weak and you could become, we could become subservient to anything because you've had one thing, but it's not really about the thing. It's still a judgment of us.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, a lot of, you know, research says that, you know, 10% might indeed eventually become habitual, maybe have a problematic relationship with a substance, but that leaves the other 90% fairly normal behaving people. But also the rest of the 10 people, you know, we should not be putting them into prison and putting more harm on them. We should help them and find ways.
For sure.
Makes children of us all lowest common denominator thinking. Sorry to interrupt. Lowest common denominator thinking about society there, that because some people will misuse their liberty, nobody should have like privacy on phones because pedophiles will be using them. It's sort of like this all the time. And yes, of course, you know, if the statistical dangers of drugs, of course, this is what the regulation of people is about, is to make that less likely through those positive interventions that you facilitate to respect them as human beings. As soon as, you know, you respect them as human beings, then you can engage with people about how their drug use may affect society, those 10% of people. And of course, that is a social construct in the sense that those harms that Aleksi is identifying for 10% of the people, those harms are so clearly coming from the way that we access the substance and you know, the context of that.
And in a way, I don't think, let's say the three of us were given free hands to sort of write new drug policy laws and, just sort of make it in a way that people have access. And I mean, that can of course then increase certain problems that we don't really want to be increasing, partly because we don't have a culture of passing knowledge from elders to young new users, of doing these in a sensible kind of way.
Is that because of the taboo you're saying?
Because of taboo, I mean, like, there's not really passing knowledge in that sense, unfortunately, yet. I mean, there are, of course, the web is full of that kind of transformation of knowledge in a sense. And I mean, but we don't have really the structure. So I don't think, like, even if we would go towards, let's call it legal regulation of all drugs, I mean, I think that has to come with a cultural change where we are indeed more open about the use and the harms and the benefits, and how to sort of pass on that information to
having a discussion is just so important. Absolutely.
Because, so we regulate society's approach to the drug experience, of course, rather than look at the regulation of drugs. So we have to have a mature discussion about that. And it is something which is it's difficult, because, I mean, for example, you might think a mature thing to say is that children should be excluded, under 18s or under 21 should be excluded from, a policy. But it may well be quite an immature thing to say, because actually the mature thing to say is that human beings have a propensity, we're permeable, we're actually biologically wired for that. And the only thing restricting that is social constructs, which are there for a reason, to protect the development of children. So we have to do it from a purely protective way with children, but understanding that they also have the same biology in terms of permeability to molecules, and it may well that we have to be even more mature, because if we exclude under 16s or under 18s from, say, cannabis access, then the very same harms that we're getting now, because people have to buy illegally, will manifest anyway. So like a mature society debate about drugs is just what they do for us, really. I mean, and when and if it's a good idea, if a teenager can enjoy it in a safe way, why not? I mean, these are philosophical and moral questions that need to be asked.
And I mean, I'm currently doing an external evaluation of this cannabis mini intervention project in Finland, where they are indeed trying to approach young cannabis users not in a very moralistic kind of way and just say no, but indeed, like, ask them, like, hey, why are you using cannabis, and how much do you use, and have you thought about, just sort of going to that level and just sort of discussing it with the people that these policies are affecting. And I really like I think it's sort of a quote from Canadian HIV network, like, nothing about us without us. Like, we need to include the end users into this sort of policy discussion. And decision making.
Yes. I think I heard that in Vancouver, that idea that there's a grassroots movement is really strong there, and that we have to respect, like, even the property and where we're having meetings is reclaimed land from Indigenous people, and their practices must be respected. Can't just domineer the minds of people. This is what it's about: respect for the minds of all people.
No.
Brilliant. We have actually hit an hour, so we've already gone quite a bit over what we were kind of scheduled to do. I mean, it's fairly open, but I'd love to actually continue this, get you guys back on again soon. Like, maybe if there's anything you want to finish up or finalize or mention before, and also give any shout outs to anything that you're working on. So I'll put up references and links to any projects that you're involved with, if you've got a few minutes to do that now, and then if you'd be time in person in my at the studio that we're setting up.
Who are you asking?
I'm asking both of you. It's an open offer to you and to you both to do this another time, and obviously it's easier for Aleksi to come over because he's in the Netherlands, but you know, there are a lot of events related to this topic that I'm sure that you guys are going to start to see each other at a lot more probably. Yeah, so it'd be great to do a longer session and open up this a lot more.
Could I just say, I don't own my idea at all, and it is just something that is same about, it's as much about me as about anybody else, and vice versa. And if anybody wants to take this little logo and to put on anything, a t-shirt, so they can run a business, I don't mind, whatever, to promote that. Thank you. Is that I'll send them that GIF, or you can just, you know, and let's actually try to rescue ourselves in language. That's all I'm asking. I'm not involved with other projects until we get this language thing right, because I actually find it quite painful to endure a debate that is discussed about the most intimate, the most personal, the most private of our existence in such an abstracted form about, you know, the interest of divisive, disparate groups, you know, talking about objects and how good they are. But I have to please ask people to understand this paradigm and promote it. That's all I'm asking. You know, it's not mine. You can. It's rescuing yourself as a part of the equation of life. And
yeah, but you're the person who is actually putting it into very eloquent words. And you know, I saw your talk at which one was the last one that you did last year?
Baker Convention.
Was it the Bickler? Yeah, I saw on YouTube a couple of your speeches, and they were fantastic. So, you know, as you are essentially becoming a voice for it, a spokesman for this. So even if it's not just your thing, you are the face.
Maybe, well, in some sense, then I should be grateful that it's so weird that you know, I picked up on it, that people will ultimately recognize and say, well, Darryl said that.
Yeah.
I just don't feel I've got any choice. I don't feel I've got any choice other than to say it. And you know, just like I say, I could disappear tomorrow, it would still be just as true. And then, you know, it's just there. And I'm sorry if I come across like as bombastic about it, a man obsessed or not paying full attention to people he's met at conferences before, because he's on such a mission to see does this person understand what I'm talking about.
You're extremely passionate about it, but it's admirable, you know. And
that's it. I'm playing that line for the moment, and it is taking traction. People are beginning to understand that, like the science committee chair, which I just informally just said, yeah, we've got, you know, I said, you've got to take a scientific view to what you're doing. You can't just, you know, scientists, they have to follow codes of rules about units and how we describe things. We can't suddenly change mass into volume, and we can't suddenly create illegal drugs out of thin air. You know, respect the discipline of language and respect the discipline of law. But when you do your stuff, if you're going to be our spokespeople, I'm just asking, as soon as they start doing it, as soon as they get it, this will take off, and it will help. Forget about the courts right now. It will help because people will start to get a sense of real agency, and we'll stop all this government nonsense. Drugs are illegal because you're making us criminals because making me a criminal because.
Aleksi, how about you?
Well, I think I share a similar addiction with Darryl to drug policy. So I'm addicted to drug policy, but I'm trying to take a bit of a break and enjoy the summer. But this Thursday we are having a little documentary test previewing in Amsterdam at the Vrijpaleis, part of something called Dutch Drug Stories Photo Expo, organized by a Puppy Drugs Museum project by Mainline. And we're previewing a sort of a film about Franjo Grotenhermen, who's a medical cannabis doctor in Germany, one of the pioneers of medical cannabis. And there's also a short animation about harm reduction in Russia, which seems quite interesting. So that's this Thursday on the 23rd of July here in Amsterdam.
Great.
Other than that, I have a little YouTube channel called Drug Ventures, where I've been documenting drugs and drug policy since 2016. Basically, all kinds of videos over there if you want to go and have a look. few documentary projects on the way. One of them called Rock Stars of the Psychedelic Renaissance, where we've gone through different conferences, where I met Darryl as well. Unfortunately, I have not interviewed Darryl yet, but I think we should arrange that at some point. And we've just asked all these sort of new scientists and old scientists of the psychedelic renaissance of who they are, what they do, and what's their first or most significant psychedelic experience. It's been sort of part of this sort of idea of like we need to come out from this user closet in a way and be open about these experiences. And I've been very, very humbled about how many people have been willing to share that on video as well. So looking forward to wrap up that project or just continue with it, because I mean, even though this is psychedelic renaissance going in science and medical research, I mean, we're not there yet. And I mean, there's all kinds of ways that this can still sort of backfire, or I don't know, that the powers that be will not allow it to happen. But indeed, it's such a long history and of this issue that it's not going to go away anytime soon. But it's great to see that there's more and more people joining the movement, and indeed, like this, you can contribute and support all kinds of other organizations if you're not close to one at wherever you are, and discussions like this Shifty Perspective, for instance, is a good way to sort of spread the word.
Yeah, hopefully getting this out to people who may not have, like you said before, people get into these bubbles where, you're kind of just in your own, everyone you speak to is on your wavelength and in agreement with you. So I'm trying to bring it out to people who maybe are not in this, in this field, or interested in or aware of certain things with drugs and any of the topics that we cover. Just trying to really open it up to everybody to realize that there are so many different perspectives, and we live in our little bubbles, and we need to break out of them.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, guys. It's been brilliant. Very, very. It's admirable. Your passion, both of you, is inspiring. Thank you for joining me, and I'd love to do it again. And I'm sure there's definitely a lot more to talk about. I feel that flew by really fast.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
thank you, and
thank you.
I will speak to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
You tuned in for Shifty Perspective, and please check us out. Like, subscribe. All the links we posted to anything that these guys are involved with in our channel. Make sure you give us a thumbs up, and